Welcome John Rice and welcome Deandra Rose. I'm Judith Kelly, I'm the Dean of the Sanford School, and I'm really pleased to welcome all of you to our Wilson Lecture, which is one of our distinguished lectures that we have here at the Sanford School. We're celebrating 50 years of public policy at Duke, and so we're really pleased to have this event under that theme. You can go on our website and find a lot more information about everything we've been doing for the last 50 years. We have a 50th anniversary website specifically dedicated where you can learn some about that. But today's event is held in partnership between Polis, which is our Center for Politics, that's led by Professor Deandra Rose, and the Center for Strategic Philanthropy and Civil Society, which is led by Joel Fleischman, also a professor here at the Sanford School. So I really want to thank both of you for partnering with us. A few housekeeping notes. If you have a phone, please turn off the signal on the notifications and all that on your cell phone. We're recording this today, and we welcome you to join the reception that is afterwards in the Sanford lobby there. So today's conversation really is going to be about how institutions can help diversify a pipeline of leadership into positions of influence, which matters because it matters who's around the table for the outcomes that we have, both in politics and in business. So it's really about how to level up leadership. And Deandra Rose, who is the director of Polis, is going to have a conversation with our special guest, John Rice, today. But I'm not going to introduce John Rice because Joel Fleischman, whom I mentioned earlier, has been a very long time friend of John. They've known each other for about 25 years, I found out earlier. So I'm going to invite Joel up to give a more personal introduction of John. So let's welcome Joel to the podium and our guests. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. It's always a pleasure to be in a program beside you. You're a great leader of the school. I've known all of them, except for the first one. You're the best of all. Don't tell anybody I said that. In any event, it is a pleasure to be here. My mission is to say a few words about John Rice. I can't help not say a word or two about Deandra, because she has done a wonderful job running Polis. She's given new life to Polis since she took it on. She's a wonderful colleague who is always open to ideas. This joint effort being one of them, and another conference that she is putting together later in this month, was dealing with what kind of policy can North Carolina adopt that will help it deal with the rural areas of North Carolina and development problems in those areas. But for me, watching Deandra eyes sparkle when you mention something and saying, her first response is, well, sure, we can do that. And the truth of the matter is, she usually does deliver, as far as I know. I don't know any exceptions to that rule. So in any event, it's a pleasure to work with her on all the things she's doing. She's doing a spectacular job. My specific mission is to say a few words about John. The truth is, the first member of his family that I got to know was his mother. John's mother was a distinguished scholar on the staff of the Brookings Institution, and I had the privilege of serving with her on a board, the Urban Institute board in Washington, where she was a longtime member. And one day she said to me, Joel, I have this wonderful son who's trying to figure out what to do with his life. Would you be willing to talk to him? This is not the first time this kind of thing has happened. So, I wasn't the slightest bit resistant. Knowing Lois Rice, I knew that if given her values and given her intelligence and other characteristics, that any son that she had was going to be really good. And I have not been disappointed. The truth of the matter is that when John and I had a conversation, he and I talked about the alternatives when he came to talk with me. I think he was still working in the NBA, I believe. And for those of you who don't know, I didn't know what it was. I know it's the National Basketball Administration. But I'm sure times have changed, so you all know what it is now. And even I know what it is now. In any event, and he was struggling with the idea. He talked to my class this morning about how long he tried to balance two balls, one of them working for NBA and one of them trying to figure out what to do about the problem of doing a better job in making opportunity for persons of color in the United States. So we talked about it. In any event, he then moved on to start this organization called Management Leadership for Tomorrow. Management Leadership Tomorrow, I'm going to read this so I don't forget anything. You'll forgive me from going literal right now. He is the founder and CEO of Management Leadership for Tomorrow, which is a national nonprofit organization that is on the front lines of the push for racial equity, transforming the leadership pipelines of our most influential organizations by driving breakthrough results for individuals and institutions. MLT prepares men and women of color with a high trajectory post-college jobs that deliver economic mobility for their families, and then provides the social capital they need to become senior leaders who can transform our vulnerable communities. MLT also provides a comprehensive solution for institutions that combine best-in-class recruitment, retention, and diversity strategy offerings, as well as MLT Black Equity at Work, which he will talk more about. It's a certification which establishes a comprehensive framework for racially equitable workplace practices to which organizations can manage and hold themselves accountable. That's the story of MLT. He'll tell you much more about it. I can summarize it by saying John's MLT, the organization that he founded 20 years ago, now works with about 2,500 persons of color each year. And the total number starts working with them when they go to college, identifies them, provides mentors and coaches for them in their pursuit of an education, and then steers those who want to go to business school to business school. If you talk to any business school director of admissions, he'll tell you that they get the largest number of their applicants who are persons of color through the efforts of MLT. It's an amazing achievement when you stop to think about it for 20 years. He founded it, he's been running it for 20 years, and he's now come up with, which he'll tell you more about, the certification for achievement in the field, but not just applied to individuals, but applied to corporations. He's got 60 corporations that have already signed up for participation in the certificate the MLT Black Equity at Work certification. And so 60 of the largest corporations in the country are already involved in it, and there are a number of other corporations that are involved in the programs as well. It's an honor to have John here. I admire him tremendously for what he's done, and I welcome you here to this podium, to the podium, you and John.
Thank you so much, Joel. Thank you so much, Judith, for those warm introductions. And I'm excited to add mine to the mix. John, it's wonderful to be here with you today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
So before I get started, just a few items about how the session will go. So we'll start with about 35 to 40 minutes of conversation. Then we'll open it up to the audience for questions. A number of audience members have already submitted questions using the registration function in the chat box, so we've got those handy. Also, for those of you who are joining us on Zoom, we will be monitoring the chat function, so we welcome your questions, and we'll have some mics for the audience. So we'll look forward to all of your questions, so please be thinking about any you'd like to raise. So I must start, our conversation tonight is titled Leveling Up Leadership. So I just want to start with some really striking statistics about racial equity in corporate America. So right now, only about 1% of Fortune 500 CEOs are African American. About 2.4% are South Asian or East Asian, and 3.4% are Latinx. So it sounds like there's a lot of work to be done in the corporate space. And so your work with MLT started when you were a student at Harvard Business School, and you looked around your classroom and you noticed this underrepresentation of racial and ethnic minorities in your class. And somehow that led to MLT. So I'm wondering, could you, before we get into your story, could you give us a little bit of background on MLT, what you all do, and the impact that you've had to date?
First of all, I have to say thank you to you, Deandra, and to Dean Kelly, and to Joel, and to the entire Sanford community for having me here today, and having me be able to be a part of the 50th anniversary celebrations. I had the incredible pleasure to serve on the board of visitors here as it was making the transition from an institute to a school, and that experience was transformational for me, and to come back today and be a part of this is really even more special. So I also have to say, I know Joel gave an overly kind introduction, and almost as if he was someone who has been a fan from afar of our work, but like many people who have come through the Sanford School, and many people beyond the Sanford School would say, that my organization would not be where it is today were it not for Joel in his various hats as mentor, as a leader of a major foundation that made an early bet on our organization when it was just a business plan, and as somebody who has been so integral in around the key pivot points for again, over a period of 20 plus years. So thank you, Joel, and I know there are many others who would say the same thing. Thank you, Joel, but I want to thank you on behalf of the other folks, okay, who you've been so helpful to. So to your question, Joel really teed up kind of what we do, but I think it's just to reinforce. We have an approach to advancing racial equity in this country that is based in sort of I would call the economic levers for related to that and related to opportunity. The first one is really the individual lens, and what we really focus on putting more economic mobility, economic influence, and career trajectory in the hands of people of color, focusing on primarily on African American, Hispanic, and Native American folks, and we have this for individuals a kind of a suite of programs that span college through the senior executive levels that at the early stages are really focused on helping low and moderate income students make the transition from college to those first jobs that are critical to becoming economically mobile and really closing the deal on economic mobility for them and their families. So if you think about it, a stat that's not well known in this country, that 60% of Black and Hispanic and Native American four-year college graduates, okay, places like this as well, that 60% of four-year graduates do not get jobs out of college that require a college degree, right? And if you think about all the work that this country has focused on relative to K-12 ed reform, college access, college affordability, college persistence, right? If we do all those things right, and you graduate, and you don't get a job, and you get a job that you don't get a job that you couldn't have gotten out of high school. Is that the way I say it? No. You don't get a job that you couldn't have gotten out of high school, then that undermines the entire sort of what we know as the economic, high school to college to career economic mobility system. What we focus on at the early stages of our work is really that what I call the last mile, which is college to career. We have a lot of work to do in this country around high school and community college to career, incredibly important, but there hasn't been as much focus and attention on the fact that even the 4-year college to career, we've got some major challenges that need, and some holes in that system that need to be addressed to get people to places where they're economically mobile and to put them in the game as it relates to the trajectory to positions of influence. And so we place about, we work with about 1,000 undergrads a year now. We'll be growing that significantly, but we place about 98% of those folks who are largely Pell-eligible families in jobs that starting average $80,000 a year, right? And that's, if you come from a family that's $50K, $40K, a third of our folks come from families that are $30K and below, that's, immediately game changing, right? And so our focus is really helping folks get those first jobs out of college, helping young professionals apply to the major graduate schools with a focus on MBA programs. A lot of our folks do public policy joint degrees in business school, and a lot of them come here. And then we continue to provide the coaching, sort of sports-like coaching that's distinct from volunteer mentoring. Sports-like, high accountability coaching, a high-performance playbook that's built around the bar that takes to get into an organization, the hiring bar and the promotion bar, and that kind of social capital, the kind of relationships, mentoring, and so forth, high-performance peer community to help them advance through every threshold that they face in their career, all the way to the senior executive suite. As Joel said, we work with about 2,500 folks a year, 10,000 to date. Several of them, several hundred of our folks have become senior leaders. So we feel really good about our work at the individual level. And but it's also really important, if you're talking about racial equity, to work at the institutional level around employers. And so we've designed a comprehensive offering that we think is really a solution for organizations to help them elevate the rigor with which they approach and advance racial equity, that combines helping them source, recruit talent at the various entry points, whether it's college, graduate school, or experience hiring. We help them retain and advance the diverse talent that they have. We have a whole advisory arm essentially that provides the how-to strategies and tactics to get to critical mass of diverse talent. And then about a year ago, we launched this racial equity certification, which we'll talk about, that really establishes for the first time an absolute standard for what good looks like with respect to racially equitable workplace practices. So and that, as Joel said, we have about 60 companies that have signed on that, but we work with about 200 companies overall, whether advising them, helping them on the recruiting pipeline and so forth. And so we've designed probably a overly complex, maybe too comprehensive model, but we really started with how do we solve this problem? And we knew it would take a long time, and we knew it would be hard to explain, much more harder to explain than a scholarship program, a fellowship, an internship program. It's really really focused on filling the gaps in the system. In our theory of change, if that's a term, is essentially that if we can put more economic mobility and economic power and influence in the hands of people of color, as well as kind of widen the pathways and as it relates to institutions, and employers. And I would argue employers are the most important pathway for economic mobility and financial stability for all Americans. And so it's really important that those are equitable workplaces and provide the opportunity for everybody to enter and to thrive. If we can do those two things, then those things actually increase the cost of racist behavior that we see in our communities. Those things also are I would argue, are really important to address the root cause inequities that we see every day around healthcare inequities, education inequities, inequities in the world of criminal justice and policing, and also those things are really important to change the narrative around race, in this country. And so we have kind of a long, pretty ambitious sort of theory of change and set of initiatives. But I think what I've learned over the years is that you got to set some pretty aggressive and ambitious goals. And if you fall short on some of them, that's okay. You may do some really special things along the way. And I think we've had a lot of traction, and we're excited about the progress.
That's great. I'd like to come back to some of your comments about what employers can do a little later in the conversation. But for now, you mentioned a few themes that I want to pick up on. So you talked about higher education and college and helping people to get into the game.
Yeah.
And so, we're here at Duke University. We are steps away from Cameron Indoor Stadium. So we have to talk about something really important, basketball.
Sure.
And is it too soon?
Something I'm
Some people
passionate
are like,
about.
we're not ready to talk about this just yet. So, you were a collegiate athlete. You played basketball at Yale, I understand.
Yep.
Rumor has it you are known to have played basketball with at least one former U.S. president.
True.
Yes. So when you founded MLT, you had an exemplary career at the NBA. And I wonder if you can take us back to when you were, grappling with this question of whether to continue your work with the NBA or to really move into MLT in an increasing fashion.
Sure. So for those of you who are students and aspiring social entrepreneurs, what I'm going to say is, don't try this at home, okay? Meaning, I was, as Joel sort of described, I was making my own way up the corporate ladder. After I finished business school, I worked 5 years at the Walt Disney Company, another 4 or 5 years at the National Basketball Association. And while I was doing that, nights and weekends, I was kind of bootstrapping this organization. I'd raised a little bit of money, had 1 or 2 or 3 people working on it full time. And was piloting sort of the programmatic model and trying to figure out where the gold was, where could we have impact, and there was a little bit of intentionality to that when I actually did the initial business plan for this organization when I was a second-year student, and importantly, with a person who was then an entrepreneurial management professor. This is before the world of social entrepreneurship really was a space. But I was so fortunate to work and do a project where I wrote the business plan for MLT with a professor named Gregory Dees, who went on to come to Duke here, came here to Duke and became really the defining academic in the field of social entrepreneurship. And so having done that business plan, which probably wasn't the best business plan, but it was okay. But I knew I had something. I knew that I probably did not have the experience and the relationships to build something that would be highly sustainable and have a lot of impact. You hear so many folks talk about, I want to start a nonprofit, right? It's easy to start a nonprofit organization. Okay? What's hard to do is to build something that has real impact in our communities. And so I think I was mature enough to realize I wasn't ready to do that, and I thought that getting some experience in larger organizations could help me. And after 9 or 10 years in, I got to the executive levels, and I kind of realized, I'd spent some time over in Japan turning around NBA Japan, and working like crazy, and like, geez, if I can do this, maybe I'm ready to give this thing a college try, okay? And so I happened to get married to a woman who's here back in the States, and I decided, hey, that was the opportunity for me to leave the MBA, go out and try to take this on full time, see where it could go. And my perspective was, if it completely fails, but if I give it my best shot and everything goes wrong, the organization fails, it ends up causing huge problems in my brand new marriage, so that I get thrown out of my home, the parade of all the things that could go wrong. What I did know, that if everything went wrong, and this is one of the most important things I think that lessons here, is that my mother, who's as Joel talked about earlier, who was pushing me all these years to go out and go do this, Johnny, go do this. What she instilled in me was, if everything goes wrong, you can always come home to the room that you grew up in, okay? Which wasn't a lavish room, it was just a room, right? But the worst case scenario, you could come home, all right? And I knew that, the reason you go to all these nice schools is that so you can have a backup plan, right? I knew I could get a job somewhere else. I could go back to the NBA, go somewhere else. But that the confidence that you get from one of your parents telling you, if everything goes wrong, you can go back to where you started, and that starting point ain't that bad, then that gives you confidence to take some risk. And so I asked my wife to to keep the lights on at night and pay the bills while I was sort of toiling in obscurity to figure this out for an indefinite period of time, which is a lot to ask of a new partner. And I began the journey of building MLT. And I think one of the things I did realize was that in order to build something that's really sustainable and meaningful, you have to dedicate yourself fully. And you have to do it for an indefinite period of time. You just and you have to take it one step at a time. Because if someone told me 20 years ago that it was going to take 20 years to get to an organization that's serving almost 3,000 people, 200 companies, has a budget north of $50 million, and will probably close to $100 million in the next few years. If someone told me that it was going to take 20 years, I'd say no way I'm going to do it. But that's too long. Especially when you're in your early 30s. You just can't think that way. So you have to take it in short increments.
One of the most fascinating aspects of your work at MLT is that the model is rooted in how athletic organizations go about recruiting and sort of cultivating and supporting athletes. Yeah. And so I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about this approach. Why did you think that it would be successful for the corporate world?
Yeah, so putting in context, anybody, well, this will be an easy question to answer because you teed it up, but if you think about it, what's the one place in our society today that if you have talent and you're willing to work hard, they're going to find you. You're not going to get lost. What's the one area? Some people say maybe it's the military, but it's really, it's the world of sports. Okay, and it's not every sport, but sort of the major sports that if you have talent, somebody's going to find you. You're not going to get lost. And so when I, having been an athlete and basketball player growing up, worked the NBA, being passionate about the world of sports anyway, I had to study what worked and how they develop talent in the sports world. Okay, and one of the things that the key insights that has shaped our work is that if you think about why it is that that's the one area that people don't get lost, regardless of your race and socioeconomic background. Okay, you don't get lost. It actually, there are three things that really underpin how we develop athletic talent. Okay, and it just so happens that none of those three things are in place when it comes to the world that 99% of us, the world in which 99% of us are pursuing economic mobility. Okay, the first thing that is present in terms of how we develop athletic talent is that in sports, whether we give you high accountability coaching, okay, not mentoring, okay, high accountability coaching at every stage. Whether you are a fifth grade rec athlete, a high school athlete, a college athlete at any level, a newly professional athlete, or an experienced athlete at the top of your game, you always get coaching. It never stops. All right? You wouldn't think about not continuing on with coaching. That's core to everything you do. Well, in the world outside of sports, you only get that kind of coaching when you're already a senior executive at a major organization that brings in some special guru coach to help you with some challenges that you're facing. At every other stage, high school, college, early career, there's no coaching, right? And so that was the first aha. The second thing is, like, in the world of sports, we make it very clear what you have to demonstrate to get to the next level, right? And there's immediate feedback on your performance. There are videos and there's stats and so forth. So, and so it's pretty clear what you have to do to develop to get to the next level. And in the world that we are in, actually organizations are really bad at making it clear what you have to demonstrate to get to the next level. And because that is really opaque, the way to navigate in organizations today is that you have to engage with people organically. And who have been there, who have been successful, and who can kind of tell you, here's what you need to do, and give you some, kind of coaching on here's the bar and what you need. Here's what you need to do to address it. And And it just so happens if you are a person of color or even a white person and you don't have relationships with people who have been where you want to go and can give you that roadmap, then you have to figure it out yourself, and it's very hard. And and the third thing is that's interesting in the sports world is if you're a good athlete, everyone wants to, we surround you with a really compelling peer community, and everyone wants to be your mentor and connect you to, to people and so forth. But in the outside of sports, it's really hard to piece together that social capital, those advancing relationships. It can be done, but you have to work really hard at it. So interestingly, the coaching at every stage, a high-performance playbook based on a transparent bar, and the kind of the relationship, the high-performance, the peer community and so forth, those three things are just not present in the world that most of us are trying to pursue our goals in. And it just so I looked at that and said, hey, if we can actually bring those into the way we develop people outside of sports, maybe there's something. Maybe we can win just and try to level, to create an environment where people don't get lost. And it just so happens that that's our model as an organization. It's high performance, high accountability coaching. It's defining what that high performance bar is to get into a place like this, to get to a great organization, an employer, in a company, to advance. And once you understand what that bar is, and you can develop a roadmap for where you are relative to that bar and coach people to it, and then surrounding people of color with the kinds of relationships that are really important, that social capital. And guess what? It works. And so that's really, in an ironic way, I'm not sure, it may be coincidental, my work, my longer tenure than Joel would say I should have spent in the world of sports. I probably should have left earlier and started MLT full time a little bit earlier, but there were some important things lessons and insights that have shaped our work that have helped it be successful. And I'd argue that the bigger picture, we're just one organization. As I said, pretty, now a medium to heading to be larger size nonprofit. But I would argue that for organizations that are trying to mentor programs for middle schoolers and wrap-around programs for high school students, I just believe that the insights around those three things, that if we can apply high-performance coaching and move away, and build on top of mentoring and really build a coaching orientation, define what high performance looks like, and provide really a lot more social capital to folks. I think that model could be applied to the work that many organizations are doing around economic mobility. And one of the things that I need to be spending more time on is how to think about taking our model and our insights and getting them out to organizations that are working in different spaces. But I do believe that there's something to be learned very substantively, beyond leadership lessons from sports. There's something to be learned from how we develop athletic talent that can be applied to our efforts in this country to advance economic mobility.
Quick follow-up question.
Yeah.
Do you think that this model might also yield lessons for sectors like higher education or even politics?
Absolutely. I think the same core elements are in place, right? Where there isn't the rigor that we'd like to see around coaching and preparation, whether in the world of politics or academia. And the bar for high performance is still way too opaque, right? That's just kind of the way it is. It's not going to change. Organizations do a little bit better, but you kind of have to reverse engineer that bar so you know what you're shooting for. And when you know where you are relative to that bar, you have a lot better chance to hit it. I think it's the same thing across all these different sectors. After I don't know how many more years, probably maybe give me another 10 years trying to build this organization to its potential, and maybe pivot to try to solve some other challenges. But I do think it will be. I really am passionate about trying to apply some of the insights that we've gained to advance opportunities for inequity outside of kind of our niche.
So switching gears just a little bit, I want to go back to May of 2020 and the tragic murder of George Floyd that really ignited a wave of racial reckoning in the United States and beyond. And really igniting conversations about structural racism,
Sure.
inequity, discrimination, and the role that various institutions ought to play in addressing these challenges. How would you describe the current state of racial equity, broadly speaking, in the United States? And, to your mind, where are we now, and how do we get here?
Right. Some people, the one way to ask that question or to talk about that is this a movement or a moment, right? Where are we and how are we progressing? And my answer to that one is that I think progress is accelerating, but it is very fragile. Okay, that's my headline. So I think it's important for people to understand what actually happened. Okay, what the catalysts have been, and then what needs to happen going forward. What are the barriers that still exist? And I was talking to some of Joel's students earlier today, and I shared with them that there's the horrible murder of George Floyd. There was also this really bad incident where no one got injured, but up in New York in Central Park with the black gentleman who I think went to Harvard or something, who was bird watching in Central Park and was perceived to be a terrible threat. And this woman who was actually a progressive, I think, not racist person, I think, for all, indications, almost, got away with ruining his life, okay? And those two things, I think, people don't, I think the juxtaposition, they happen like 2 days apart, okay? 2 or 3 days apart. Those two things were shocking in themselves, but what happened after that, the way leaders and organizations responded to those events, I think is just as important. So what happened? Most major universities, most major companies, put out really compelling, powerful statements that saying, we stand against racism in all forms. And what we saw with George Floyd and Amy Cooper and other things just cuts completely against the values that that are near and dear to us. I thought that was, it was nice to see. It was really important and strong statements that you saw across the country. Well, what leaders did not expect was that people of color inside those organizations, inside those companies and universities, they stood up in ways and were emboldened in ways that they've never been before, and said to their leaders, we really appreciate the statements that you made standing against racism in all forms. But our lived experience within these organizations is completely and fundamentally inconsistent with those statements. And that was shocking to white leaders. White leaders did not think that racism in some forms was alive and well in their organizations. And so what happened was organizations were on record standing against racism externally. And and you can't stand against it externally and have it be festering internally and not if you now know it. Okay, that becomes an enterprise risk for an organization. So what you saw with the high conviction and movements whether it's contributions and a goal setting and a lot of efforts to move the needle, really were a function of leaders saying, "Wow, this is we missed something. We have to now make progress, or else we are racist ourselves. We can't say we stand against racism if we're allowing it to happen." And so that really is I think important to understand. That said, when all that happened, leaders still didn't know what to do. There was still a lot of ambiguity and cloudiness. What do we need to do to advance it at a much faster pace? What's the how-to? And because the answers weren't readily there for most organizations, in too many cases, what you saw leaders and organizations fall back on was what I call sort of a moral equity approach. It's the right thing to do. We need to move the needle, but they did not have the rigorous sort of the approach to moving the needle, and they still weren't really proximate to the core underlying drivers of why, what got us here. Why is there? Why are people of color in our organizations experiencing our culture very differently than their white peers? Why are we struggling to even recruit and retain talent and so forth? What are the, just understanding the problem solution was something that leaders, even the smartest, best informed leaders, are just not well informed about. And so I would argue that the most important thing, what still needs to take place in our country to enable this to go from a moment to a movement, okay, to have sustainable change, is that we have to shift our mindset to one of a moral equity mindset to what I would call kind of a more of a business equity mindset, which is we need to approach advancing racial equity with the same level of rigor that we apply and require in every other part of our organization. Whether it's in an organization like this, how we admit students, how we recruit and advance faculty, how we develop pedagogy, right? Same level of rigor, that apply that same level of rigor to advancing this, and that's really the challenge, is that most organizations are not doing it. Okay, and when you don't do it, you get in sort of a doom loop of results that are subpar and confidence being, remaining low, and people saying this is too hard and so forth. And the last thing I'll say on this, which is I think to close, is that I think the moment now is for that this is in a country where we are very divided. You have. In a country that's probably never been more divided, from a very large percentage of our population that actually is fighting against equity, okay, and that has been made sexy by some people in this country, and in a subset that's really trying to undermine democracy in this country. The folks who do believe in equity, the people who are leading organizations that do want to move the needle, which I would argue is the vast majority of white leaders, okay, are not racist. They want to solve this problem. They want to move the needle. They're not happy with where we are. I actually believe that there's so much effort being focused on trying to address, trying to bring people who don't believe in equity, who argue, kind of are on one side, together with the people who do believe in equity. My argument is what we need is leadership from people who do believe in equity, okay? And before we start focusing on bringing the country together around these types of things. Don't fight those battles until the people who do believe in it are taking a rigorous approach. And unfortunately, what I've seen is that there is, among even the most progressive, highly progressive white leaders, there's just still a lack of, they're still not well informed about why we are where we are and what we need to do to move the needle. And they have to become more informed so that they can actually tackle this issue with a level of rigor that's really important. And we can't, and they have to move beyond a narrative that I think is still out there, which is when it comes to these issues, it's them, not us. Meaning, that our organizations, our educational institutions, our companies have been open to people of color. There's no overt discrimination that's been outlawed. Okay, for many years we've stood up diversity initiatives across the board, and we're still struggling with recruiting, retaining, advancing diverse talent, and inclusive work environment, all those things. There's still a narrative among non-racist white people that it's them, not us. That we've opened the doors and something else is not, it's still a pipeline issue, or they're not performing at the same levels. And that's really, I think that the catalyst really from here on is to get everybody, especially a focus on folks who do want to move the needle, who do believe in equity, to get well informed about the problem solution, why we are where we are, and to commit to having a business equity mindset that has the level of rigor in your strategy and your execution. And that's that same level of rigor that we apply in everything else. And that, to me, requires us to move beyond, a narrative that is it's them, not us.
So I have one final question
Yeah.
before we open it to the audience. And I'm curious, there are a number of students here, undergraduate and grad and professional. And I'm wondering if you have any advice that you would offer for students who are interested in following in your footsteps. So, one, either as a social sector leader, or two, in tackling really big challenges using innovative approaches and policy.
Okay, maybe three quick things. First piece of advice for prospective social entrepreneurs and innovators here of all ages. The first thing is, don't be too caught up. Don't get too caught up in trying to do your own thing. Meaning, what I hear, I hear it all the time. Again, from my own MLT fellows when I meet them in our seminars and so forth, and people more broadly, is that everyone wants to start a nonprofit and solve a problem. And I would say that make sure that somebody else or some organization is not already doing something that is what you want to do, or that has a similar approach to what you envision. I would say consider joining, trying to build with other people before you try to do something on your own. And I say that practically because doing something on your own is really hard. Okay, much harder than I ever thought it would be. And along the lines, we had to unseat, or other organizations that were tangentially relevant to what we were doing, and people told us that you're competing with them, and you're gonna, the bottom line is social entrepreneurship is really hard. Find partners. If you're going to do something on your own, try to find a partner, and do your homework before you launch something new, because there are way more social sector organizations that need to be out there right now. We need fewer that are scaling to larger, that are tackling the many problems we have in our communities, that allow the philanthropy community to kind of focus their efforts on a more narrow set of winning organizations. So don't get caught up in the sexiness of saying, of starting your own thing. Check your ego a little bit on that. Secondly, if you are building an organization, don't focus. We often feel like I want to start a program that does X. Okay, I would encourage you to start with the problem that you're trying to solve, and build back to the programmatic solution that you can directly tie to. If we do this at a certain scale, then that will make a meaningful dent in the problem. Too often, it's, I want to start a program that does X, Y, and Z. And I think that ultimately, what I see time and time again is social entrepreneurs kind of having some early, a little bit of early success in the first few years, but then realizing that what needs to happen to grow what they're doing is not really consistent with, what needs to happen to attract the funders that they need to grow the next level would probably draw them away a little bit from solving the problem they want to solve, and it becomes a little bit more tricky. So my argument is that what will actually make more wide-scale impact is more insights. Okay, yes, and that think about your programmatic work as an engine and a petri dish to generate winning insights that can scale beyond your organization. And so that's number two. And the third thing is, which I talked about before, is you got to take a long view. If you're going to do something, if you're ambitious enough to want to tackle some challenges in our communities, it takes many, many years, right? And you could argue that you need to be a little naive to really get into the game. I think that worked for me. But as Joel has said many times, that you have to think about, you may think about it in 2-year increments, but you have to think about it as at least a 10-year journey. I've been at it 20 years, not including full-time, not including the part-time years, and I still think we're scratching the surface. Yeah, we can look back. If it all ended here, if I had to stop working out, I can be incredibly excited about what we've accomplished, but I know we're just scratching the surface. So the long view, it's obvious. Like, if we're that easy to solve some of these intractable problems? What's the right way to say it? Really tough problems, then they would have been solved already. So you got to take a long view. I would argue that emphasizes insights, and that lowers the, to tie it all together, that isn't duplicative just for the sake of doing something on your own.
Thank you for that. Those are powerful insights. So I'll start off with 2 questions that came into the registration portal, and they have to do with social capital. It looks like a number of students are really curious about your insights here. One question is, what, if any, kinds of sacrifices have to be made in order to build social capital? And 2, what can each of us do in our daily lives to support social capital for others?
Ooh, so I'm not sure you have to make any sacrifices, okay? But social capital is really about relationships, and it's not just knowing people. It's people knowing you, and people willing to make some level of bet on you. And if you're a social entrepreneur or any kind of entrepreneur, the highest level of social capital is actually having people who will make 2 bets on you. The one bet at the start, because they believe, somebody, like somebody's mother, tells somebody that person might be, a good person. But when you make that initial investment, and it goes okay, but it's not clear, 100% clear it's a winner, people have to believe in you enough to make another bet. So that's just one element of it. But my point is that every relationship matters. Okay, and if you have, so if you're a person of any age, the sacrifice that you have to make is actually when you meet somebody to follow up, and to be rigorous about making it easy for that person who may be helpful to you or maybe not, you don't know, to make it easy for them to do something small for you, okay? And I would argue that the best way to do that actually is to offer to do something for them. Right? I can't tell you how many people who have been helpful to my organization, who I end up like giving, whether they're individual donors or corporate executives or people just want to help in some way. I can't tell you how much work I've done to help people's kids, either on the college counseling, career counseling, connecting, right? And the bottom line is, like, I know how to do that well. I can help them, right? I can even a very senior executive at Goldman Sachs, the big investment bank, whose son is trying to get into the world of sports. That senior executive at Goldman Sachs doesn't know what it takes, doesn't actually have the answer for his son. And if I happen to have the answer, and if that person maybe can help me down the road, then it makes sense for me to spend some time. Can I do something small to help? And there may be no payoff at all, but you have to make every relationship matters. You can't nurture everyone, but you have to be willing to create the conditions where if and when needed, you can come back and ask for help. And I think that's for young people, and I've made these mistakes myself too many times. We just find a way to convince ourselves that I don't know what to say. It's not urgent. Why would they want to talk to me? I shouldn't follow up, and then when we delay, and then it gets harder, then you can't follow up. I've been through all that, and I just encourage people like me, people like you. A professor told me, it's a great story. A professor told me, he said, there's a reason why we are professors. I was asking, why don't students just knock down your door and come see you and spend time with you? Okay, I'm amazed that more students kind of are hesitant to do that. And the professor told me, she said, one of the reasons why we're professors is because we're introverts, right? We want people to come to us, and when they do come to us, we love engaging with them, right? But so if you knew professors were largely introverts, then you might be a little bit more bold about going to their office hours or building those relationships, because it's kind of hard for them to reach out to you. So this is really the core of it all, is really kind of putting yourself in the other person's shoes, and when you do that, you often conclude that it's a lot easier than you think, and to build those relationships and develop social capital, whether it's with people who are more senior than you, who are farther along than you, or with your peers.
Thank you so much. So for our live audience, we have a mic runner in the back. So if you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand. And so maybe while everyone's thinking, oh, I see a question right here.
Oh, thank you. Hi, thank you so much for coming to speak with us. I'm Laurel, I'm from Greenville, South Carolina. And I had a question about why you chose to pursue this avenue in business specifically. Maybe why you didn't consider policy instead, if you felt it was more effective. Like, why was this the path that you chose specifically to tackle your issue at hand?
Not why I pursued graduate business school myself. You're saying through the work that we do.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, right. So 2 things. One is our work is not just about preparing people for the corporate world. It's social sector, okay, public sector, and private sector, companies, entrepreneurs, and so forth. And but it is focused on kind of people who are going into organizations. It isn't about developing creative talent or helping preparing people to work in research labs. We just don't have the expertise in that area, right? Part of why is because I knew something about the world of organizations myself, having worked in them, having gone to graduate business school and stuff. So it was a little bit kind of tied to what I knew, but it also is tied to our theory of change, which is that you have to focus on things that are going to. The way to change the narrative about race in this country, the way to address inequities, has to include putting more economic mobility and influence in the hands of people of color, and it has to include helping employers, which are the most important pathways for economic mobility. It has to include work that helps them widen the road for everybody, and that's so that's really why we focused on these pathways, the world of organizations more broadly. But again, we have a number of our folks, probably 15-20% of our fellows are in the social sector. And we have a few who are in the public sector, including the newly elected mayor of Cleveland, who I think I think Joel has wrangled him to come sometime in the next year to speak here at the Sanford School. No, it's already agreed. Fantastic. Yeah. Yes. Dave. Huh?
John, how are you?
David, my goodness.
Well,
how long has it been? It's the family member here.
Since I think babysat for you, but that's a long time.
See? Oh my goodness.
This is wonderful. So I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you give us some examples of how your work has helped well-intentioned institutions that claim to care about equity actually turn their aspirations into practice? Because it seems to me that shifting a culture, shifting systems so that they actually deliver on these aspirations for economic equity is enormously hard, and yet it seems that you're having some traction. So could you give us some examples of how things have shifted and what you have learned from that? Thank you.
So I'm so happy you raised this point, because the first chapter of this organization was really focused largely on advancing individuals. Because we thought that if we got more people of color into great jobs, they'd be economically mobile, they would progress into leadership positions. So they get into leadership positions in organizations, they would in turn help to make them more equitable. Well, we realized, many years in, that we have to put more effort, more thrust around working directly with institutions, because if they're not doing winning things, then our people won't ever get senior, okay? Not enough of them will get senior to change those cultures. And we could never put, no matter how big we got, we could never get to critical mass of the thousands of organizations there are in this country. So we, about 5 years ago, we said, hey, we've learned a lot about what it takes for organizations to move the needle. We had over 100 organizations working with us, recruiting our diverse talent, working with them to help advance the diverse talent that they had, sending them to MLT for the kinds of outsourced, safe place coaching and so forth. So we had a lot of institutional data points and insights. We had a lot of individual data points, 10,000 people, high touch coaching model. We said, we need to package up our insights on the individual and institutional side and go to companies, become an advisor to companies. So we started an advisory arm, a consulting arm of our organization. That's one of the fastest growing things that we're doing. And that, has allowed us to, go to the C-suite of these organizations and give them a deep dive into what actually is happening in their organizations, a diagnostic around the current state, so they had clarity on where they are and why. When you talk about what does the recruiting pipeline look, what is the experience of diverse talent within your organization, to really get well informed about current state, and then we help them develop a rigorous plan to move the needle, and help them on the execution, the change management, like you do in every other kind of part of your business. So we've been going around working one-off with many organizations and providing not just like a nice roadmap, but a deep diagnostic that's based in analytics, a rigorous 5-year plan and execution support, so that essentially removes the kind of excuses for not, for doing things, and takes people away from, this is so hard, I don't know how to do it, there are too many variables, and essentially just establishing the same level of rigor that they apply in everywhere else, bringing that level of rigor and giving them the support and hand-holding it to actually make it happen. So that was step one, and we've had a ton of success doing that. And then a little over a year ago, we launched this racial equity certification, building on those insights. And so now we've signed up 60 organizations who have committed to two things. One is a rigorous plan, a rigorous racial equity plan that we help them with. That will get approved based not on where you are on representation, on supplier diversity, and on everything else, but solely based on the rigor of the plan. To remove any excuses or concerns about we're not where we want to be and it's embarrassing and so forth. So we work with organizations the first step of the certification is work with us to develop a rigorous racial equity plan that's built around best practices that we know from organizations, and then that plan gets approved, and then we help them over the course of 1, 2, 3, 4 years to make progress against that plan, and then they have the opportunity to get certified as a Black Equity Work certified organization, and we're launching Hispanic Equity Work essentially to help organizations with that rigorous approach. And we found that a scalable framework for what good looks like with respect to racially equitable workplace practices, we realized that's never been out there. And that provides, it's all relative, scale with everybody below the bar. So you have to install the level of rigor and the how-to, And then if you can provide the recognition and reward associated with that, then folks get even more excited about the opportunity. So that's kind of the strategy. It's a combination of advising organizations and then creating a framework, a rubric for what rigorous racial equity practices look like, and then helping organizations along the way to get there.
Thank you. I think, do we have time for one or two more questions? Dean Kelly in the front.
So John, early on, when you first made some comments, you articulated sort of the John Rice theory of societal change implicitly. And you commented on it, Deandra, but didn't pick up on it further down the line. And that theory goes, or sounded something like, let's level up, let's get the pipeline going, let's get folks into positions of influence, and then the environmental justice problems, the policing problems, the other problems will get addressed through that, right? Now, this is very different from the theory of change articulated on the streets after George Floyd's murder, right? People were not marching down the streets with banners going, let's get more people into, the corporate, right? They were saying, defund the police, do this, do this, do this. So how do we know that the strategy you're suggesting is going to actually affect those social outcomes we care about? So I could articulate it, but I just wanted you to talk a little bit more about that hint that you had made earlier about that bigger question.
Yeah. So here's how we know. Okay. We know because all the things that we've done have not worked. So we know that something is lacking. And we can change the names of buildings and change the symbols, which I'm all for. Okay. We can do a lot of things that are reinforcing inequities and either explicitly or implicitly, kind of allowing racism to making it harder for us to change the narrative about race. My father, my late father, who was an economist, okay, one of the most insightful things he said to me when we talk a lot about these issues, and he said, what we need to do is increase the cost of racist behavior. Okay, and I wrote a piece in the Atlantic that talked about that focuses on kind of the three types, I would argue, sort of three types of racism. Okay, one is the kind of racism that you're talking about, sort of the overt racism that we see in our policing in some cases, that we, when you're making derogatory comments, the sort of obvious, like that, the second, sort of, that's kind of racism in the first degree, right? Then there's second degree racism, which essentially is standing by, not standing up against other, people who are doing things that are overtly racist, or I should say, not supporting people who are fighting against racism. This is what you saw, as an example, this is what you saw, sorry to go back to sports, Joel, but when this football player, Colin Kaepernick, began kneeling because to protest policing solely about policing in our communities, instead of uplifting him, the NFL and other people allowed the narrative to change to he's unpatriotic. He's not supporting America and democracy and our military, right? And my point is, like, that is racism in the second degree, is when you don't stand up, we don't support people who are promoting anti-racist behavior, okay? The third degree of racism, okay, is what we focus on. And this is what I call, this is akin to kind of in the criminal justice world, involuntary manslaughter, where we don't do anything that's overtly malicious, right? But we create the conditions where somebody's career is shattered, right? It's the involuntary manslaughter, kind of analogy. What it means is that if we don't do things to unwind practices in our institutions, okay, at the employer level, that make it harder for people of color to compete on a level footing with their white peers. If we know that things are out there that make it harder, and we're not unwinding those practices, we're continuing to perpetuate practices that hold people back, then we're essentially maintaining the conditions that make it more that enable that make it harder for people to compete on a level playing field. And that actually is a more nuanced version of racism, but it's equally pernicious. And I would argue that, the increasing the cost of racist behavior comes in a few ways. One, it's, more people in leadership positions who in the organizations that can influence, for example, voting rights. When you have people running around most of our states trying to create voter suppression laws, you saw when some companies, in Georgia in particular, step up, right, and make it harder for those politicians, because they can pull funding from them, make it harder for those politicians, increase the cost of that racist behavior by taking away their support for those types of politicians, okay? But you need people who are in leadership positions who actually believe that that's a lever you need to pull. You don't get there unless we unwind practices and organizations that make it harder for people to get to leadership positions. So I'm essentially a believer that we can't expect people to wake up, different people. Everyone has their biases and so forth, but all we were looking for is people to do things that promote equality, and reduce inequities. And you have to take an economic, kind of a crass economic lens. You need to put more power and influence in the hands of people of color so that it's harder for them to be subjects of racism. And then organizations, employers, have to push their weight around in our communities, not be so insular, and stand up. And again, don't move beyond the narrative, it's them, not us, meaning it's the government's job or philanthropy's job to address these inequities in our communities and say, actually, we can play a role, right? We can increase the cost of racist behavior when it comes to policing, when it comes to voting rights, when it comes to a lot of areas, if we have a different mindset. So my view, again, long way of explaining, but my view is that we got to take an economic lens, and that if we do, okay, and if we look at race as an independent variable, as opposed to always viewing race within the prism of class, if you understand that regardless of where you went to school or where you've worked, your experience, my experience, just by the way I look, was very different at Disney, at the MBA, okay, and everywhere I've worked than people of color, than my white peers who went to the same schools, okay? You have to understand that racism is an independent variable, and if you think about it as an independent variable versus only something that poor people of color have to deal with, then you're going to take a different strategy in how you tackle racism. And no one's arguing that you don't focus on helping people move from poverty to a solid wage job. We need to do more of that. But what we're saying is you also need to focus on helping everybody, regardless of their socioeconomic background or where they are in terms of their career trajectory, maximize their potential. And you have to open up the pathways for everyone to do that. And when you do, then white people will see more people of color on the same economic mobility kind of path. They will work in organizations side by side with them and actually view them as equals. And then they will see leaders who outside of the world of sports and entertainment who they look up to and admire. And that's where that's when the narrative changes. And I hate to say, those are the conditions in which we stop getting scared. White people stop getting a little bit scared when they're walking down the street and they see somebody who looks like me wearing a hat and a hoodie, whatever, walking toward them, those are the conditions that change that narrative that actually, that where our blood pressure goes up. We feel that there's some fear when people don't look like us that are coming our way. It's all connected. And our view is we just have to do a little bit more of the kind of connecting and take a more robust approach to it.
So I know there might be additional questions, but for everyone in our audience, we invite you to join us upstairs for a reception where Mr. Rice will also join us. But first, I'd like to say some thank yous. So first, a huge thank you to Mr. John Rice. Thank you so much for joining us. Dean Judith Kelly, Professor Joel Fleischman for bringing us all together for this amazing conversation. To thank Cassie and Caitlin and the entire Paulus and Sanford teams for putting together this wonderful event, and to all of you for taking time to be with us tonight. It's wonderful to see you. We hope that you'll check out sanford.duke.edu for more information on events like this and more about 50 years of public policy at Duke. So hope to see you upstairs, and good night to everyone online.